So let's look at the false claim. So the first thing for Simmel, it's false, right? Objectivity is a consequence of detachment and indifference. We would think that's normally true. At the bottom of page 14, objectivity is a consequence. A person might say that objectivity is a consequence of detachment and indifference. So that insofar as I am a particular occupier, I have this sort of detached indifference, right? Right? I have a detached indifference from the thing X, right? And if the thing X happens to be the Occupy movement, then the only way for me to objectively understand the Occupy movement is to have a detached, indifferent response to it. So, like, for example, I can't really say these books. I'm sort of fond of my books. You guys have seen me eat pages out of my books, so I can't really talk about books like that. But this cup, I'm sort of, you know, I'm attached to this cup too. I'm attached to all my things. What am I indifferent towards? I'm indifferent towards this pencil. Okay, so I'm not really, this pencil's whatever. You know, I can objectively talk about this pencil. It's one pencil, blah, blah, blah. There isn't really a particular fondness for the pencil, and we think in terms of objectivity in this sort of simple sense, right? To not get so sort of bootleg in my examples, there is a conception that a physician, in attempting to do surgery on a patient, needs to have an objective distance from the patient in order to perform his or her functions properly as a physician, right? If the physician is too emotionally attached to the patient, then it might cloud his or her objective responsibility to, you know, maintain and deliver professional service, right? I'm too emotionally attached to the patient. I can't perform my job objectively, right? This is sort of, and I'm not, you know, within medicine, that's its own truth. We're not talking about medicine now. We're talking about sociology, philosophy. Simmel is saying that with respect to our social movements, that claim is false. He's not saying that it's false for all claims. With respect to this particular social movement, I'm saying, with respect to the occupation movement, I'm saying that objectivity is not maintained. You don't attain or maintain objectivity by having this indifference towards the movement. That is not what it means to be objective. You cannot, furthermore, be objective in your assessment of the occupation movement if you are indifferent to the movement. You can't. Right? Your indifference is biased. And I'll talk about that in a second. Top of page 15. So what's true? Right? For Simmel, it's important to recognize that objectivity is a consequence of the relation and balance attained from regulating one's attachment and detachment. One's attachment and detachment, right? One's attachment going towards and detachment moving away from, right? One's attachment and detachment to the movement, right? I can talk about the occupation movement, and this is very important, right? And I'm going to give you a concrete example in a second. It is very important to recognize that if you want to objectively assess this particular global social phenomena that is now an even larger movement, and I would anticipate it's going to get even larger. I was listening to NPR this morning while I was on the road, and they're talking about the problems of Greece and the EU, and if Greece forfeits and defaults because, you know, it's likely that Greece might not accept the austerity measures that were in place by members of the EU, blah 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 blah. If they do, it's gonna it threatens the euro and the United States and blah blah blah. You know, I'm not really interested in any of that economic discussion, to be honest with you, at all. What I'm interested in is the social ramifications of that economic discussion. And I would imagine that a stronghold for social revolution is about to take place no matter how it goes down in Greece. You know, I would put all chips in that the next 2 months are going to be very, very trying times for citizens within that nation. Why? Because now we have to we have to, as strangers, and the stranger doesn't necessarily just have to be an individual. You can talk about a state as a stranger on a international level, a much larger international nexus of relations. You have to recognize that we want to preserve our identity as a nation, but insofar as we are now economically bound to the euro, we might have to take austerity measures from nations that we don't want to impose possible hardships on our people, right? But if we don't do that, then we're not going to get the bailout money and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, it's a pretty interesting time to live, right? As an individual, it's a pretty interesting time to exist as a sovereign nation, but everybody is engaged in this attempt to balance, right? How do I balance my dependency on others? We're social creatures. I am dependent on others. And my willingness, my desire, my drive to identify myself as a unique individual. It's the attempt to attain that strangeness, that balance, that relationship between attachment and detachment that defines both the individual and the social, the movement towards the social. So it's important to recognize that. I can't stress how absolutely contemporarily sensitive this discussion is. It applies to stuff that's happening as I'm speaking right now. And it will apply to stuff 20 years down the road. This lecture is timeless, right? Because, I mean, these texts were written, in some cases, 100 years ago, right? Maybe not as much as 100 years. I don't think I incorporated some of Mark's stuff. But some of these texts are almost 100 years old, and they're still applicable, right? So it's very, very, very important. So, movement-specific note, you cannot critically, objectively assess the occupation movement without participating in the movement to varying degrees. Your participation is more than simply attending an Occupy rally or protest. Your authentic participation is a result of the attempt to locate a balance. This is the point. Locate a balance between your personal preconceptions of the movement and the movement as an evolving social phenomenon. I have to find a balance between my personal preconceptions of the movement and the nature of the movement as evolving. It's not this fixed, localized thing. The occupation movement is becoming something new every day. And my involvement in the occupation movement, in my assessment of the occupation movement as a stranger, is going to change depending on the transformation of that movement, right? So as the movement is wholly nonviolent, here is my location within the movement. Here's my approximation to the movement. If the movement becomes more violent, well, I might detach from certain aspects of the movement and be attracted to other aspects of the movement. If the movement changes wholly, it might totally be something that's appealing to me, and I might be completely immersed by the movement, or I might be so repulsed by the movement that I pull completely out. All of this is contingent on the transformation, the social evolution of this phenomena. And you have to recognize, as I said before, it's not a Western United States phenomenon. This is a global phenomenon, right? This is a global phenomenon in identifying one's place, one's balance with respect, or even a nation's balance with respect to the location of other nations, other leagues, other associations, is going to be an ongoing, really, dilemma. Between personal preconceptions and the movement as an evolving social phenomena, your evolving connection to the movement and your ability to drift in or out of alignment with the movement, right? So I have a simple drawing, right? The stranger is located within the Occupy Wall Street movement. You now know sort of what that means, what the image means. An objective assessment of the Occupy Wall Street movement can only occur truly after you've positioned yourself, right, within the Occupy Wall Street movement. Me personally, and you know, there's varying degrees of this. I wouldn't say that this is a hard and fast rule, but just me personally, I would not have an understanding of Occupy Wall Street from watching YouTube videos. If all I did exclusively was to sit behind my computer and watch other people at rallies, watch other people at protests, watch other people at sit-ins, watch other people in the streets, I couldn't say that I have as good an experience of, or as good an understanding of the Occupy Wall Street movement as someone who